kind of big. And I want to talk to you about how to become a sailboat.
Okay.
I want to talk to you about that. Because if you want to be a sailboat to capture the winds of luck, there are 3 things you need to do. First, you need to build that sailboat. The next is you need to recruit your crew. And third, you need to hoist the sail.
Okay.
And this is very important to separate these 3 things.
Okay.
You build your sailboat. That's all the internal work. You know, it's funny. Whenever I tell people I'm writing a book about luck or I'm doing work on luck, they go, oh, yes, fortune favors the prepared mind. Well, I love that quote. You know, Louis Pasteur, great quote about fortune favoring the prepared mind. But what is the prepared mind?
I don't know.
That sailboat is your prepared mind.
Okay.
That is all the internal work that you need to do to be ready to ultimately catch the winds of luck.
Okay, so let's stop right with building the sailboat, okay? Because I know as you're listening and watching right now, you're like, all right, I'm with you, Dr. Seelig, but how do I build a sailboat? What does that actually mean? How am I doing the internal work to turn this brain of mine that's told me my entire life, oh, things like that don't happen to a person like me. Well, I'll never get out of this debt. I'm not going to be this way. I'm not smart. I'm not good. Because I can tell you right now, that doesn't sound like you're building a sailboat. So what are the specific things that we need to do or know or change in order to take advantage of step 1, which is you got to build that sailboat in yourself?
Exactly. And it's very, very important.
Okay.
One is you need to know what your core values are.
Okay.
If you do not have those core values, which are like the keel under your boat that keeps you steady, you're going to be manipulated by people who ask you to do things that are not ethical. They're not legal. I mean, this is how people get caught when they don't have their core values. And in fact, I can tell you a story about what happened to me when I was young and I didn't know how to do this. I had taken my first job right out of graduate school. And it was a med tech company. And I was so eager. I was just wanted to do everything right. And the president of the company asked me to go to a conference. And it was a conference actually being hosted by a competing company. And he asked me to go not as a member of the team of this company, but as Dr. Seelig from Stanford. And he was my boss. Why should I question him?
Yeah.
I had never thought about whether this would be ethical or not. So I said, sure, of course I'll go. So I got on a plane. I went to Chicago. I registered Dr. Seelig from Stanford, went to the conference. And as the conference started, it was a relatively small conference. At the end of every session, I raised my hand and asked all sorts of probing questions because I knew a lot about this technology because I was working at a competing company.
Yeah.
And they started getting suspicious. And they called up my company and they said, is Tina Seelig there? And of course, the receptionist said, yes, no, she's not here. She's at a conference in Chicago. And so I was getting into the elevator to go up to my room, and 2 people followed me in. The door shut, and one of them turned and hit the stop button.
What did you think was happening?
I had no idea. I turned around and they looked at me, they backed me in the corner and they said, are you a spy? I mean, I burst into tears, honestly. I was like, oh my gosh. But they said, we called your company. They were very funny. They said, we understand you're the VP of marketing of the company, which was sort of a joke since I was like an intern. But they escorted me out very quickly. And I sat on the sidewalk thinking, what happened? And I realized it was because I hadn't even taken a minute to think about my values. And to think about, and I was very unlucky, wasn't I? Because I should have said to my boss, of course I can't do that. I can't misrepresent myself. And so one of the first things you need to do is really think about what your core values are.
How do you figure that out? Is there like a simple way to really think about what your core values are? Because I can think about moments in my life, for example, a period of my life where when we were struggling financially as a young married couple with kids, my core value was safety and security. And so I said yes to lots of stuff I wouldn't do right now because I wanted to pay the bills. And it was aligned with my values then. My values now have shifted because I still value security and safety, but it's not on fire right now. And so I have different values, but I think it's one of those things where it's not something that people stop and think about. So how would you recommend if the person's listening right now, because I think we all want to be luckier, and we certainly want to open up the wins and like capture as much opportunity as we can. But how do you figure out what you actually value?
So there are a lot of ways to do it.
Okay.
And a lot has to do with taking the time to actually think about it in advance.
Okay.
Think about what your values are. Are you going to misrepresent yourself? There's a slippery slope. Once you make one decision to do something that's not ethical, it's much easier to make the second decision, right? Once you've done the first one, that door is open. And you have to think about who you want to be in the world. You also can put together a personal board of advisors. This is a really helpful tool. Who are you going to go to when you're asked to do something where you have a kind of a spider sense, where you go, you know what? This doesn't smell right. Who do I go to get some feedback? And it's also really helpful to have the ability to walk away. Now it's really difficult when you're in a situation where you're feeling financially really vulnerable and you go like, I don't know what to do. But oftentimes there's a case we used to use with our students many years ago about somebody who had taken on a lot of financial debt, bought an expensive house, moved to a new city, did all sorts of things that were expensive. And then when the company he was working for started doing things that were illegal, he couldn't leave because he couldn't afford to give up the job. So think about not putting yourself in a position where you're so tied to an organization or to some situation where you can't walk away if you're asked to do something that you find is unethical.
Well, I can give another example, and let's see if this one checks out, Dr. Seelig, with the research you've done. I was talking to a friend over the weekend who's in a relationship, and this person knows that they don't want to be engaged to the person that asked them to be married. And she was going on and on and on about it because it's a very difficult decision. And she said, well, the problem is, I just really am a peacekeeper. And I said, hold on a second. That's what you were in your first marriage, which is why you were miserable. You kept the peace and you never told the truth. You, in this chapter, have made it very clear that what you value more than anything is being a truth teller. And I would imagine that if you don't understand what your core value is in terms of why you want to be even in like a romantic relationship, I want to be with somebody where I can be fully myself versus constantly suppressing what I feel and what I need in order to make somebody else happy, you will never, ever, ever build this internal sailboat, and the winds of chance are going to steer you to all kinds of relationships because you don't realize you actually value that rather than just companionship. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And that's just one piece of the puzzle is your core values. You need to know, which is sort of tied into what you just said, the story you tell about who you are in the world, right? We each have a story of who we are, and that story is always shifting depending upon who we're with and how we feel about ourselves, and the ability to own that story.
Story is really awful. I'm not smart. I'm not good enough. Nothing ever works out for me. How do you start building this sailboat?
Great. So you need to understand that you can do little experiments every day.
Okay.
You need to be willing to take some risks, to get out of your comfort zone and to try something different.
Okay.
Now, let me ask you now.
Yes.
And please call me Tina.
Okay. Tina. Sorry, I keep calling you Dr. Seelig. Sorry.
It's okay. Are you a risk taker?
Absolutely.
Okay. Most people answer yes or no, but risk is much more nuanced. They're all different types of risk.
I should have said depends.
I know, but you said
See,
yes.
You're so smart.
Okay, it depends.
I'm like, yes, I take a risk. But no, I always take a calculated risk.
Exactly, but think about the different types of risk.
Because I'm not a hot air balloon just throwing caution to the wind.
Exactly, but think about the different types of risk. Let me show you something.
Okay.
This is the riskometer that we use in our classes, where students map their risk profile.
Okay, now I want to just explain for the person who's listening right now, because we're going to walk you through this. And as Tina walks us through each of the 6 different types of risk that you're going to be faced with in life, I want you to think whether you have a high or low tolerance, because you're ranking it 0 to 10. And all she has is a circle, and there are 6 different points on it. And she's going to walk us through it right now. And as Tina walks through each of the 6 types of risks, I want you to be answering this for yourself, because I think this is a really interesting way to get into values.
Exactly. And to figure out what type of risks you're comfortable taking and where you want to stretch.
Okay, great. So let's go through each one.
Right. So this is called a spider chart. It looks like a spider web.
Yes, it does.
Where the center is 0 and the outside is 10.
Okay.
So you map yourself on it. So
okay,
let's
so
try
we're going to do this together.
Okay. So I think you and I are actually pretty similar.
Are we?
So,
okay.
Yes. So physical risk, where would you be on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, gosh. I'm probably like a 6.
Oh, really? Okay. Great.
And I want you to be thinking as you're listening or watching, okay, where am I? 0 to 10 on physical. Are you a big risk taker? Like my husband and my son. I'm just like, can we please bring it down from like a 9 to a 5?
Exactly. My son was a very competitive cyclist, and every time he would go out on his bike, I would just hold my breath till he got home.
My husband's a cyclist too.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can you not listen to music as you're like cycling down the road at 40 miles an hour? At least he wears a helmet.
Okay, so let's talk about emotional risk.
Okay.
Telling someone how you feel.
Oh, I'm a 10. I'll take any, because it doesn't feel risky to me to share how I'm feeling.
Great.
How about you?
I'm very high. I mean, I'm happy to tell you that I love you.
Oh, I love you too. And I love you as you're listening and watching. For somebody though that is like lower on the emotional risk, what might that feel like in your life that you would be scared of?
It feels vulnerable to tell someone how you feel. That maybe you feel anxious, or maybe you feel scared, or maybe you feel, maybe you really like someone and you're afraid to tell them. Got it. Right?
Okay,
and so someone who has a high risk profile there was like, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
I always feel that you tell people things and you get data, right?
Yes.
You get some data back. Social risk.
Now, talk to me about social risk. What falls in the category of social risk?
Being willing to get up and give a toast at a wedding, giving a talk.
Talking in a meeting at work?
Exactly. Being out in front of the world. Being out there, and it's not emotional, but you're going to get out there and do something very public.
I'll tell you. So the sort of things where I am giving a toast, or I'm talking in a meeting, or certainly because I've developed the skill of giving speeches in arenas, I have 0 fear about it. So I would put myself at a 10. However, when this show was nominated for a Golden Globe, I had never walked a red carpet. Mm-hmm. I am not at all comfortable putting myself out there in terms of a beautiful dress and look at me. And I would say I was about a 2.
So isn't that interesting?
Yes.
I think this is fascinating, Mel.
Okay.
Because you had never done it before.
No.
But if you had done it 2, 3, 4 times, it would have been natural.
Yes.
It would have been easy. You're happy to make social risk because you've been doing it so much.
That's
and this
true.
is super important, right? If you start out saying, oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable for me, you can stretch. You started as a 2, but the next time you do it, you'll be a 4, and then you'll be a 6.
And I'll tell you what, I'm not buying the dress. I'm going to borrow it next time. It turns out a lot of people borrow from designers, but I was the idiot who bought it. Yes.
Okay. For the next time, you'll be ready.
If there is next time.
So, okay, let's talk about financial risk.
Okay. So this is one where I would be a 0. I don't want to take any risk financially, because earlier in my life, the first 40 years, I took all kinds of risks. I was stupid with my money, racking up the credit cards, maxing out the home equity line, living in some sort of fantasy, like somehow I'm just going to get lucky. And even though I'm making all these dumbass decisions, this is going to somehow so now that I've experienced the pain of driving myself. Now, you know what's interesting about this too? I can look backwards and see how my decisions created a situation where I was very unlucky.
Yes. But it was your behavior. It was
the
choices you made.
Yes. There were like not everything. There are some things that swing that are unfortunate, but my decisions certainly put me within striking distance of having a major catastrophe. And that's what happened.
Exactly. So I have to say, I have to assume you take some financial risk because your business, you have to be
We're like, we are, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I have scaled a business too quickly that I then have to lay people off. Like there are 50 people and their families that depend on the decisions that my business partner and I make. And so I think we're both very, very like risk adverse when we think about the implications of what we say yes and no to.
Right. Okay. Fabulous. Yes. Well, now it's interesting because you might think that some people like venture capitalists have a really high financial risk profile. But they're always trying to squeeze all the risk out, right? Just like the person who's jumping out of the airplane, they're going to make sure the parachute is packed properly.
Yes.
So, it's very interesting that the more prepared you are, it doesn't feel like a big risk, right? Mm-hmm. You have this company with 50 people who depend on you. You feel like it's a low financial risk. Someone on the outside will go, wow, that's risky. But you've squeezed all the risk out by testing and doing lots and lots of experiments and scaling really slowly so that it doesn't feel like it's a financial risk.
Great. And the next one's intellectual.
Intellectual, like, you're going to go try something new, stretch, think about things you haven't thought about before, solve a problem that's intractable.
I don't even consider, I'm so intellectually curious. It's a 10. Let me ask you about intellectual risk. What are some everyday examples of what intellectual risk looks like in your life?
It's usually problem solving. Right? It's you've got a problem that is in front of you and you're willing to tackle. It's like, okay, I can figure this out. I'm a huge believer that every problem is an opportunity. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. And that's a real entrepreneurial mindset.
Yes.
And you can foster that. You can really develop the ability to take on more intellectual risks.
So taking a risk means instead of feeling like life is running you over or there are no opportunities or nothing's going to ever work out, it would be an intellectual risk to say, well, maybe there's something I can do here.
Well, let me give you a story.
Please.
I was asked to teach 1 week about entrepreneurship in the new design school at Stanford. And I was like, what can I do in 1 week? So I had 14 teams and I gave them each an envelope with $5 in it. And I said, you can brainstorm as long as you want, but as soon as you open this envelope, you have 2 hours to make as much money as possible. What are you going to do? And I basically gave them essentially nothing, right? A few dollars, and they needed to figure out what value they could create.
Okay.
Now, there were the people, I knew you could do something. I could have a lemonade stand or a car wash or do something small. And there were the groups that did that. Then there were the groups who said, hey, you know what? That $5 is a red herring. I don't need the $5. I've got all sorts of skills. And they set up a stand to pump bike tires in the middle of campus. And they made $200, and halfway through they said, hey, let's not charge people. Let's just ask for donations. And people paid them more. Or they made reservations at restaurants in Palo Alto and with long lines. And as the reservation came up, they sold the reservations.
Oh, to people waiting in line.
Waiting people in line. Waiting in line, yeah. So, but then there were the people who said, you know what? The $5, the 2 hours was a red herring. The $5 was a red herring. Maybe my 3-minute presentation class is where the value is. And they sold it for $650.
What do you mean?
To a company who wanted to recruit the students in the class.
Oh my gosh. So they took their slot where they were going to present their findings. And they called a company and said, do you want to come and pitch a Stanford design class?
Exactly. And the reason I call this an intellectual risk is they had to be creative, right? They had to come up with creative solutions. What do I do when I have nothing? And this is also tied to luck because guess what? Opportunities are everywhere. Most people think, oh, I don't have any money. But these students created all this value with nothing, looking around and seeing the problems that were around them and figuring out how they could come up with solutions.